Hello, my name is Thomas and today I'm talking about Pontefract Cakes. Pontefract Cakes are one of my favourite sweets. They are of course small black circles of licorice and they've got a little stamp on them with a picture of Pontefract Castle. So I thought today I'd just give a little bit of an insight into this Yorkshire sweet as I have my cup of Yorkshire Gold tea. Pontefract is a very small town in the west of Yorkshire, and Pontefract, the name, means broken bridge. It's from Latin. It's a pretty old town. It was first settled in the Neolithic era, and there's a Roman road going past. A lot of the roads there are named after Viking place names, such as Bailey Gate. The gate is a Danish suffix, and it really comes into its own from the Norman era. So after the Norman conquest in 1066, William the Conqueror really wanted to put his stamp upon the whole of England, especially the north, which constantly rebelled. So he sent one of his knights up to Pontefract and there built a castle on the land previously used by an Anglo-Saxon manor. And this castle, which is on every Pontefract cake, is Pontefract Castle. It's interesting looking at Pontefract's history because often we look back in history and we say, oh, in the olden days, a king did something, said something, and everyone just had to go along with it. But really, the history of the castle goes against that. First of all, the building of the castle, it was built to try and subjugate local rebels. Then, as we look at history going forwards, for example, King John, we get a history of rebellion. King John, of course, is famous as bad King John. People rebelled against him throughout the north of England, and one of those who rebelled against him was the de Lacy family who owned Pontefract Castle. King John tried to put in a huge inheritance tax, almost prohibitive, and so the family rebelled against him with a group of other barons, which led to the Magna Carta, the Great Charter of 1215 that limited the king's power. So there is a tie between that Great Charter, the Magna Carta, and Pontefract Castle, and also these rebellions were really immortalised in the legend of Robin Hood. Now, of course, some versions of Robin Hood are very much fairy tale, some are a bit closer to history. Of course, there's the famous scene in many of the stories where Robin Hood fights Friar Tuck on some kind of bridge with a staff, and the earliest medieval manuscripts to mention this place it round about Wakefield, Pontefract. So this is a nice little connection between a famous part of English history and this sweet right in front of me. It also becomes a location very, very important in later medieval history. In 1399, the King Richard II was overthrown by Henry Bolingbroke. I hesitate to spoil the story because this is a key event in Shakespeare's play, Richard II, and ties into Henry IV Part 1 and Part 2. This great rebellion put the king into Pontefract Castle. Shakespeare often refers to Pontefract by its alternative name, Pomfrey, sometimes referred to as Pomfret, but normally Pomfrey, but it's just a shorter name for Pontefract. So it's in Pontefract Castle, again, depicted on the suite, that Richard II is placed in 1399, and then in 1400, shockingly, he dies. Again, I realise I've spoiled the play there, but this is something that rolls into Henry IV, Part 1 and 2, and even Henry V. So we have 4 Shakespeare plays that centre around the events in Pontefract Castle. If you're wondering where this is in the famous play Henry V, this is when Henry dresses up as an ordinary soldier the night before battle, circulates among the soldiers and asks them whether the son is bearing the sin of his father. This is the sin that he's referring to. It's still up for debate. How did Richard II die in this castle? Possibly he starved himself to death, possibly he was starved to death, or possibly he was simply done to death by his jailer. There were many, many stories that went around at the time. Fake news is nothing new. It's very, very debated how he died, but no doubt at all about where, Pontefract, and when, Valentine's Day, 1400. So we have a history of rebellion, and yet the town motto is post mortem patri pro filio, which means after the death of the father, support the son. And this comes from Pontefract's key role in the English civil wars in the 17th century. There were 3 great sieges at this castle, and They were supporting the monarchy. They were supporting the divine right of kings against the rule of Parliament. Ultimately, Parliament would win. Again, I realise that's spoiling a particular piece of history. If you're halfway through a book, my apologies. But they ultimately decided to raise the castle to prevent it being used again. Okay, so there we have three great ties to English history, to Robin Hood and bad King John, to Richard II and the English Civil Wars. And it was after the Restoration that the Dunhill family took over the castle at Pontefract and the lands around, and in the soft sandy soil started to grow the stick of Spanish, as it's often known, which is licorice. Licorice had been grown there for hundreds of years. In fact, nobody knows quite how long it has been grown, but the modern Pontefract cake is thought to date back around 400 years. And I have to say, this is a great, great way to enjoy yourself, the lovely sweet, have a connection to Shakespeare and Robin Hood, and, well, so many great kings. I like them very, very much, especially with my Yorkshire tea.